Good morning, and welcome to day 133 of F260 at First Baptist Meridian. Today we look at Ezra chapters 9 and 10, dealing with the idea that some of the exiles who returned to Israel had already begun to intermarry with women of other nations. Now, anytime we talk about the issue of intermarriage, we need to know that this is not xenophobia, this is not an ethnic issue, it's ultimately a spiritual issue. In that time, women from other nations meant gods of other nations. And this is precisely the course of action that had gotten God's people sent into exile in the first place. So look at how closely, in Ezra's perspective, this mirrors a wrong path. Originally, the first temple, the grand temple, the temple against which Zerubbabel's temple was compared, was built by Solomon. Solomon was told by David that if he wanted to succeed as king, he needed to study the statutes, commands, ordinances, and decrees of the Lord. And so Solomon, even though he did build a grand and glorious temple, did not study the law. Instead, he married a foreign woman, the daughter of Pharaoh, who turned his heart away from God. And he ends up marrying 700 women and having 300 concubines, and he ends up building shrines and altars to all of them. So Solomon is a great test case. As I tell couples in premarital counseling all the time, it doesn't matter what we build up if we don't pay attention to what we're building on. Solomon built a grand and glorious kingdom, but he built it on a foundation of sand because his heart was increasingly turned from the Lord. Right after Solomon, the kingdom split. And even, key religious observances like Passover were not observed until the time of Josiah. Well, let's look fast forward on the other side of exile. The exiles initially started coming home under Cyrus, with Zerubbabel and Yeshua, after the Edict of Cyrus around 538, 539 BC. And, starting yesterday in chapter 7, we're in the time of Ezra around 458 BC. And what are the first priorities when the exiles got back? Just like Solomon, they built a temple. Unlike Solomon, they have already celebrated a Passover. But what's the critical element that Solomon ignored and Ezra is there to focus on? The study and observance of the law and the covenant. And so Ezra's come into this context where he's supposed to be leading people in the study and observance of the law so that they never, ever, no, not ever repeat the mistake of exile. And much to his surprise, the people have already begun to repeat the error of Solomon in marrying the foreign wives. Again, this is not xenophobia. This is not an ethnic issue. This is ultimately a worship issue. To marry foreign women ultimately would have meant, as it did for Solomon, to worship foreign gods. So you see Ezra frame what's happening in light of what has happened. God, we've been down this path before. We've brought your wrath on us for disobeying and disregarding the covenant, even though in your grace and mercy you dealt with us far more gently than our sins deserved. And now here we are falling back into the same thing. And so instead they decide to send the wives away. Why? Because ultimately, what's the primary metaphor for Israel's relationship with God? That of husband and wife. By the way, that's adopted in the New Testament, the relationship between Jesus, the groom, and his bride, the church. That's carried over and developed right from the Old Testament. So hopefully that provides some context into the space. This has been used as a racial argument, and that's really not how it's functioning. Ezra, you just have those three key ingredients that you saw with Solomon are now seeing with Ezra. Temple, Solomon built a temple. Ezra comes right. Ezra is the next character after the temple's built in Ezra chapter 6. Passover, Solomon never observes it. The Passover is observed right before it mentions Ezra and his exiles returning. And then the study of the law. Solomon never studied the law. That's the one thing that gets lacking. David told him the one thing he needed to succeed in. We don't find him doing it. Ezra has come precisely for this reason, to lead the people in the study of the law. Again, context for the message. But keep reading, keep reflecting, keep responding. And again, pay attention, not just to what we build up to, but what we build on. What are the implications, not just of what we do, but what do our actions say about the foundation that we're ultimately building on? Do we delight ourselves in the Lord? Do we resonate with the psalmist from Psalm 119 who says his word is a lamp unto our feet and a light in our path, that we want to hide it in our hearts so that we may not sin against him? Think about it, pray about it. I'll see you tomorrow. God bless.